Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Hall, President of the Women's Congressional Policy Institute, WCPI. Welcome to the first discussion in our new economic briefing series, The Impact of the Pandemic on Women in the Workforce. As most of you know, WCPI is a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy organization whose mission is to bring together a community of bipartisan women policymakers and trusted partners to advance issues of importance to women, develop the next generation of women leaders, and foster a more effective and representative democracy. We work closely with the members and staff of the Bipartisan Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues. Our first discussion today will look broadly at the impact of the pandemic on women in the workforce, how it has affected women in working in different industries, the impact it has had on their ability to care for themselves and their families, and how we can create workplace cultures more supportive of women. Our special thanks to the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, and the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, UFCW, for their support for this briefing. Each has been an important partner in our work in the past, and we appreciate their commitment to improving the workforce for women. I would like to thank our congressional briefing co-sponsors, the leadership of the Women's Caucus, Congresswomen Madeleine Dean and Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon, co-chairs, and Congresswomen Lucy Macbeth and Kat Kamak, vice chairs. Our special thanks to our speakers, Emily Dickens, Kate Meckler, Carla Gallo, and Kim Ramsey, each of whom will be introduced shortly. We welcome Anna Schneider, WCPI Board Chair, and Board Member Laquita Honeysucker. We also welcome Congresswomen Lois Frankel, Lizzie Fletcher, and Lucille Roybal Allard, who are attending today's briefing. We will be live tweeting during the briefing. We encourage you and others to do so as well, using the hashtag WCPI Econ Series. I am now pleased to introduce Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, Democratic co-chair of the Bipartisan Caucus for Women's Issues. Congresswoman Dean is serving her second term representing the 4th District of Pennsylvania, and she serves on the Financial Services and Judiciary Committees. Among her many priorities for women, she is a strong advocate for quality childcare and expanded economic development for women. She also recommended one of today's speakers, Kim Ramsey, one of her constituents. Congresswoman?
Thank you, Cindy Hall, for your kind introduction. Especially thank you for your extraordinary work and the work of WCPI. You lift up all of us, and you make us, the legislators who are on this call, better at what we do. So just a very sincere thank you to you. Thank you also to the partners, SHRM and UFCW, and the other electeds who are on here. I'm delighted that we have Kim Ramsey also, you will hear from later. So today we're talking about the pandemic's impact on women in the labor force. We know this past year has affected and impacted millions of women here in our country. Women and workers of color were far more likely to lose jobs when the pandemic started 1 year ago and wiped out millions of service sector jobs in restaurants, retail, healthcare, and elsewhere. A report released just today by the Washington Post announced 25% of women say they are fiscally worse off this 1 year into the pandemic compared to 18% of men. The closing of childcare centers and the shift to remote learning has left many mothers with 2 times the responsibility, their day job and their part-time teaching job. Our houses, for so many, have become an overwhelming juggling act. I know my own daughters-in-law have faced these same challenges during the pandemic. The New York Times has also reported that 1/3 of working women aged 25 to 44 are unemployed because of childcare demands. While we can all appreciate the dedication and time these mothers are putting to keep their families afloat financially and keep their children on track in school, it is important that we support women during this difficult time. As co-chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus, along with Representative Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon, we are committed to supporting and advocating for policies that lift up women and families. We are working to address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on women and minorities in the workforce, focusing on women's economic development, because we know a diverse economy is a strong economy. We must create more equitable futures for women in our country. Furthermore, we must ensure that women and people of color are protected in the workplace. We have to combat discrimination and promote women's economic security by ensuring reasonable workplace accommodations for all women, as well as equal pay. Earlier this year, I was pleased to vote for the American Rescue Plan. It's a progressive, bold plan to provide much needed support to women and families. The American Rescue Plan is progressive policy, especially in the areas of women, children, families, and poverty. The bill expanded childcare assistance to help hard-hit childcare centers cover their costs and increased tax credits to help cover the cost of childcare. Specifically, the bill allocated $45 billion for childcare providers, allowed families to get back as a refundable tax credit as much as half of their spending on childcare for children up to the age of 13, provided $1 billion to Head Start to equip facilities with the resources to safely stay open, to buy PPE, to hire more staff, to ensure families can continue to access quality early learning opportunities. This is the single biggest investment in childcare since World War II, but we know our work is not done. I thank all of our partners today. I'm excited to hear from all of you how our work in Congress, partnered with you, can make a difference. Our advocacy will ensure a more equitable future for all women and girls. I'm thinking of my granddaughters, Aubrey and Ella, and another grandbaby on the way. So I thank you all, and I look forward to the rest of this conversation. I have, Cindy, I'm just going to tell you by way of process, I have a committee hearing that I have to pop over to before the end of the briefing. If I am not able to be here when you hear from Kim Ramsey of my district, know that I am a proud supporter of Kim Ramsey and her smarts, her entrepreneurial spirit, her work with the chamber, leading the chamber, frankly, but especially her work in childcare. And so with that, Cindy, I thank you for inviting me. Thank you for letting me be a small part of this conversation, and I'll yield it back to you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Dean, and your leadership is clear. Your recommendation of Kim just underscores your commitment around the child care issue, particularly, as well as economic development for women, given her chamber role. So we look forward to working with you. And with the next speaker, Congresswoman Lucy Macbeth, who is Vice Chair of the Women's Caucus. Congresswoman Macbeth is serving her second term representing the 6th District of Georgia, and she serves on Judiciary and the Education and Labor Committees. Congresswoman Macbeth is a champion of efforts to reduce maternal mortality, domestic violence, and close the gender wage gap. Congresswoman Macbeth.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Cindy, and to the Women's Congressional Policy Institute. Thank you for hosting this briefing today, and thank you to our panelists, Emily Dickens and Kate Meckler. Thank you for joining us today to share your insight into how this pandemic has so drastically impacted women and what we can do to bring women back into the workforce. Thank you as well to our wonderful small business owners, Carla Gallo and Kim Ramsey. I'm so excited to hear from you today. Small businesses continue to be the backbone of our communities, and these have been so hard hit and such difficult times, have been such difficult times for our entrepreneurs. And so I look forward to continuing to work with them to ensure that our small businesses have the support that is so critically and vitally necessary for them to go forward. Now, I am so honored to serve as the Vice Chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus, where we hold space for these kinds of conversations. And we cannot talk about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic without talking about its impacts on working women. 2.3 million women have left the workforce since the pandemic started. Those are startling numbers. And this is the lowest participation rate for women that we have seen in over 3 decades. And these numbers are even worse for women of color. The gains that we've achieved for women over the last few decades have been wiped out in just a matter of months. While the world seemed to stand still during the worst months of 2020, many women were forced to juggle working from home while also making sure that their kids were set up for success in their virtual classroom. And for those who were unable to work from home, they were faced with a difficult dilemma. How were they going to find good quality care for their children while they were away at work? This public health crisis has exacerbated the issues that already existed for women and the workforce. We saw far too many women who were forced to choose between their own health and safety and caring for their children or keeping their families fed. Thankfully, the American Rescue Plan has helped to get us out of this crisis with vaccines and the economic relief for the American people that they so sorely have needed and deserve. With the necessary funding and services to safely reopen our schools and our child care centers. The ARP extends payroll tax credits for paid family leave, sick and medical leave for employers so that workers can safely take the time off to care for themselves and their families. These are policies that will, by and large, benefit and uplift women all across the nation. Women are a vital component of our workforce, our economy, and our country. And we must continue to create policies that will keep our families safe, uplift our workers, and put women at the center. So thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I'm so grateful to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Macbeth. You've done a great job of outlining and sort of framing the issues that we'll be talking about today, and we really appreciate your remarks and your commitment to all of these issues. Unquestionably a champion. And I'm very pleased that we have been joined also by Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon, Republican co-chair of the Bipartisan Women's Caucus. Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon was elected to represent Puerto Rico in 2016 and serves on natural resources and transportation and infrastructure committees. Her priorities include expanded access to quality child care and reducing poverty among women. And Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon was responsible for bringing Carla Gallo into the panelist group, and we're very appreciative of that too. Congresswoman?
Thank you, Cindy, for your kind words, and happy to see Madeline and the co-chairs of the caucus as well, vice chairs. I want to thank you all for joining us in this very first economic briefing collaboration of the great team at the Women's Congressional Policy Institute, alongside with the Bipartisan Women's Caucus. And as Cindy mentioned, I just represent Puerto Rico in Congress. Now with the new census, 3.3 million Puerto Ricans living on the island. And I think we got a great panel today. I'm especially honored to have Carla Gallo and Mayra Guzman from GK Pharmaceuticals, hailing from my congressional district. Puerto Rico is one of the principal biopharmaceutical manufacturing centers in America. And we have the unique opportunity to take advantage of that. And for that reason, I filed HR 2653, the MEDS Act, which incentivized pharmaceutical companies to relocate to distress zones across the country, including Puerto Rico. I just want to highlight that GK Pharma is the first of these companies owned by minority women. And they have received FDA emergency use authorization approvals for the manufacturing of PCR kits, and it has got a bright future finalizing contracts with other states in the mainland. And this speaks volumes of the great stride women have made throughout the years. In just 100 years, just to mention, we went from being 20% of the US workforce to more than 50% in 2020. And this is a sign of the economic boom and female progress that our country enjoys. But as Congresswoman Macbeth was saying, the coronavirus pandemic undid many of these achievements. 4 times as many women as men are dropping out of the labor force. 4 million American families, women have taken on dependent economic role. Lockdowns have enforced women to leave the office and take care of the children. And experts have said that in a single year, the effects of the pandemic could erase 5 or more years of economic progress for women in our country. And this is the reason this forum is so important. I think the pandemic has taken its toll on working class women now facing uncertain professional future. The number of young women that have stopped looking for work has increased, as well as the number of those dropping out from school or planning to. By October of last year, it was concluded that 1 in 4 women were considering leaving work or scaling back. The pandemic has altered our nation's progress, and particularly seen in women's economic progress. And that's the reason this kind of briefing, I think, is more important. This has meant a decline in wages, job loss, and less participation. And the problem become more prevalent in Hispanic communities, known to be at a higher risk of contracting COVID. And as you may know, Hispanic Americans face a higher probability of experiencing death of a loved one, both in instances affecting their work performance. And I think it's necessary to make those questions as well, and know how much the pandemic has infiltrated our workforce. However, I need to recognize that the extraordinary work of women during this pandemic, just in Puerto Rico, in my district, 75% of healthcare workers and 80% of caregivers and epidemiologists are women. And those are big numbers. I think the director of vaccination program in our local health department and pioneer of our contact tracing system are women as well. As the 5th jurisdiction leading the vaccination rollout worldwide, we're leading the way back to normal, trying to. And conscious of that, we hosted a webinar, Women Engine of Economic Development, focusing on providing those tools for women entrepreneurs to take businesses to extraordinary heights. With that, I'm certain that we will go back to work stronger than ever, that we are en route to recovering some of the losses experienced, gaining majority from non-farm jobs in June and July compared to February of last year. I have no doubt that women are back in business, and I want to say thank you for all of you to being here and just to hear for this wonderful panel. With that, Cindy, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I think it's pretty clear that the Bipartisan Women's Caucus has an amazing leadership team and very committed to so many of the issues we will be discussing in this briefing, and more broadly beyond. And we are very grateful to them and look forward to working with each of you moving forward. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to welcome our first panelist, Emily Dickens, Chief of Staff, Head of Government Affairs, and Corporate Secretary for the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM. As a member of the executive team, she has oversight for implementing the CEO's vision, corporate governance, global outreach, government affairs, and the organization's real property. Emily serves on the executive board of the North America Human Resource Management Association and is Secretary General of the World Federation of People Management Associations. She is an attorney with significant experience in government, higher education, and the nonprofit sector. I should note that because Emily is in a location that does not support video, she will be speaking to us via audio only. Emily?
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you for having us today. The great thing is I've got some slides that I think are even better than having me on the screen. Our research slides tend to be those things that people take photos of, and you are welcome to do so. So over the last year, and first let me say to all of our elected officials who spoke today, It is so great to hear you talk about the data and the numbers. We can only address the problem when we know what the problem is and we know what the details are. And with 300,000 members who are HR professionals and executives, we spend a lot of time talking to people in the workforce to garner our research. And so next slide, over the last year, SHRM's research team has been busy keeping their pulse on the impact of the multiple crises in the workplace. And here are some data points. You heard it. The labor participation rate for women is at its lowest since 1988. But here are some other things we're hearing about the gender impact and how women are feeling. 49% who feel emotionally drained, 45% feeling burned out, 1/3 feeling tired or having little energy. There is indeed a gender impact here. And of those looking for work, many have jobs and are seeking jobs, seeking to leave those jobs because of toxic work cultures and workplaces that don't have the flexibility to meet their new needs. And you heard the number earlier, 2.3 women have left the workforce. And there are some significant workforce participation shifts. We have a shift in job patterns and job search patterns, a shift in voluntary exit, a shift in barriers to success. And you see here, 57% of women are either working or looking for work, the voluntary exit numbers as well. And this data, as you see, points to a very grim outlook. Next slide. We find ourselves at another what we call VUCA moment. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But like I've done with my colleagues, family, and friends for the past year, I'd like you to find a silver lining here. I'd like you to look beyond the terms of regression and exacerbated inequality and find one of my favorite words, opportunity. Though SHRM is producing research and laying out the issues, we know that the post-COVID workplace is different for employers and employees, and led by HR, we can make these unforeseen occurrences work better for women, families, society, and for all. And for us to make the best of this unforeseen opportunity, there are 3 themes that require your focus as a worker, your focus for the workers you lead, and your focus for the workplace. 1, this is not a status quo moment. Late last month, during a conversation with an executive from JP Morgan Chase, she encouraged employers and employees to seize the moment. We are at a different moment in our country and our companies. And what resonated the most for me was her statement of it not being a status quo moment. For years, the workplace has been the same for the most people. The triple crises of last year, coupled with continued competition to retain and acquire talent, provides an amazing opportunity to make radical changes in our workplaces. Here are some areas for consideration. Paid leave. We need paid leave policies that understand the demands of a 21st century workforce and the 21st century women, while acknowledging the unique needs of individual businesses. Policies should build on existing voluntary leave systems and encourage more employers to offer paid leave. It's more important than ever for employers to create bold, innovative solutions that enable businesses and employees to thrive in a transforming global economy. Paid leave is an area that can help organizations attract talent. It's an area where you can show your values. Another area for consideration is workplace flexibility. Similar to paid leave, organizations that have adopted modern workplace flexibility policies are better positioned to keep business operating during disruptions like a pandemic. Flexibility is more than remote work and telecommuting. Employers can get very creative with it, including flex time, job sharing, and open leave. In an economic downturn, flexible work arrangements such as job sharing can alleviate layoffs and their trickle-down effects such as mortgage defaults, failing credit scores, and the inability to pay bills. Inclusion and pay equity. When every job posting yields hundreds of applicants, employers who have built a reputation for equity inclusion, and positive cultures can stand apart and attract top talent globally and serve as a role model for other employers. It's a key recovery strategy. Job candidates want to be hired at a great workplace, and employers want to hire great candidates. Compensation is a big part of this value proposition for both. When you think about your compensation, it cannot be static. Encourage people managers to do regular compensation reviews, root out obvious areas of inequities, and stay abreast of what your employees' peers are being paid for the same work in similar organizations. It is easy to say pay attention to inequity based on gender, but if you're doing all of these things, you build a culture where gender pay equity is no longer an issue. The second thing, women in the workplace are not monolithic. Let's be mindful too that the word woman is not synonymous with motherhood. Women in the workplace are not monolithic. While it's true that women with children have a set of circumstances complicated by the pandemic, all women are not mothers, all women are not caregivers, and all women are not spouses. A laser focus on motherhood can alienate those who are not mothers, cause anguish for those wanting to be mothers, but create an unwanted solution for those seeking talent, not hire mothers at all, and we don't want that. With all of the focus on one subset of women, we've left out the women who have different needs from our current workplaces. What about the women who have that coveted seat at the table? While we've extended our empathy to the other subsets, we've not considered the pressure these executives and women serving in public offices across the country have been under for over a year. Keeping business afloat, making decisions they know could result in job losses, decreased benefits, short-term inequities. These women, who often support more than one household, have taken pay cuts to keep others employed, and while managing the business, are managing care for parents, in-laws, children, and others. What about the women living alone who've been isolated because of the lockdown and subsequent workplace cultures? Have we considered the impact of that isolation on mental health? Have we considered the loss of face time with colleagues to whom she does not report? Her lack of opportunity to network, especially now that people are pretty much over virtual happy hours, coffees, and teas. Women are not monolithic. If you address all gender issues with the same lens, you are defeating the point of creating an inclusive workplace. You are exacerbating inequality in your workplaces. You're being part of the problem. As people managers and organization leaders, and women serving in public offices, we must make extra effort to meet the individual needs of our employees. A culture focused on the individual as well as historically marginalized groups is a culture to strive for. And speaking of culture, our third theme, culture trumps compliance. Remote work, social distancing, and economic stress impact company culture. SHRM research conducted at the peak of the pandemic shows that 71% of employers said they're struggling to adjust to remote work, while 65% said that maintaining employee morale has been a challenge. Workplace leaders in the C-suite, people managers, all must proactively focus on maintaining company culture, especially if it was working prior to the pandemic, or improving the culture, especially when there was already room for improvement. As a baseline, employers need to communicate, show compassion, and connect with their employees, especially during times when people don't feel safe, are scared, and need support of all types, from the economic to the psychological to the social. What hasn't changed is that culture still trumps compliance, and harassment and discrimination has not gone away. Keep paying attention to what employees are experiencing in times of stress. Bad behavior escalates. Maintaining a positive culture can preserve your talent and help your recovery. This is the time to truly bend toward your values or fix what is not working on your teams. Whether it's the pandemic, politics, or disappointing job reports, we've found that HR, people managers, and organizational leaders must support employees during uncertain and stressful times. And strong and open workplace cultures are even more important. As we embrace the next normal, we'll need the best of the best to be part of the workplace revival, and that includes women. We can still reap the rewards of hiring women and men who also have criminal backgrounds, disabilities, are veterans, and older. And in the coming year, we're going to focus at SHRM on supporting HR professionals so they can support you to accelerate the recovery of working workers with right on time solutions and resources. We know that you're going to need help to support the mental health and wellness of your employees. You're going to need help on ongoing economic impact of how your workplace has changed because of COVID. You're going to need resources for all types of caregivers. And you're going to need guidance on inclusion and making changes that work for women that ultimately will work for all in the workplace. As women, we have so much to look forward to as we shape the next normal of workers in the workplace. And I believe we can do that because this is not a status quo moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. A lot to absorb. We appreciate SHRM's research and efforts to illuminate the many issues facing women in the workforce, and your perspective representing HR professionals, I think, is particularly appropriate for this discussion and helpful. And we appreciate all the years you've spent on this personally. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Kate Meckler, International Vice President and Director of Region 7 Northwestern for the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, UFCW. Kate has been on staff with UFCW for 22 years and has worked at UFCW Locals 400 and 342, serving in various organizing and representational positions in Washington, D.C. and New York City, as well as the UFCW International throughout the East Coast. As Region 7 Director for the Pacific Northwest and as an International Vice President, Kate assists local unions with organizing, bargaining, and educational resources. Kate?
Good morning and good afternoon from Seattle. I'd like to thank WCPI, the congressional co-chairs, and the vice co-chairs. The United Food and Commercial Workers represents 1.2 million grocery workers, food packing workers, retail workers, healthcare workers, school and building cafeteria workers, frontline workers, many of these jobs held by women, many disproportionately affected by COVID-19. I wanted to just share my thoughts on 3 sections today: childcare and school issues, the wage gap, and the mental labor that women experience. Regarding childcare, for women working in these essential jobs like grocery and food packing and healthcare, the instant takeaway of childcare options left many in a disastrous lurch. As a mom, I can share that the day it was announced that schools and childcare centers were closing, I panicked. Completely panicked. That was when the world shut down for me, not only for myself, but for the tens of thousands of moms that I knew would be affected by this hit. Public school is relied upon as a free place for children to go, free and safe childcare for many families. This was stripped away with a few days' notice with no backup plan in place. Daycare and pre-K centers were shut down for most families. And even if there was a rare facility that was able to be open, it was still limited in both capacity and hours of availability and cost for many families. And some women didn't even have transportation to alternate places for daycare, even if they did find an opening. Due to children being home all day, more money was spent on feeding children at home with the meals, the snacking. You know how kids can snack all day long. Whereas in the schools, many healthy meals and snacks were provided at free or low cost to the families. As far as help with the children, there was no instant daily COVID testing for babysitters or grandparents or outside people to come and help inside the home. And even though schools tried their very best to make do, many women did not have money for or access to resources for remote learning, such as laptops, internet, Wi-Fi, which set their children way back. Regarding the wage gap, as we already know and statistics prove, women make less than men on average for doing the same work, and the fallout of COVID-19 has just exacerbated what has already been happening. Women in essential jobs like grocery and healthcare were forced to try to balance the demands of work and children at home, often rejecting the overtime pay and the overtime hours that they would normally rely on. Women in non-essential jobs like Macy's or Bloomingdale's were laid off or furloughed altogether. Tracks that women had been on for promotions in key positions were wiped away as their industries suddenly changed underneath them. Many women were forced to choose between caregiver role or wage earner. In some cases, women demoted themselves, going from full-time to part-time just to try to cover all the bases. And some women, as we've heard mentioned many times this morning, some women left the workplace altogether in big numbers to handle the responsibility at home with children or responsibility with older parents. Even other things that we haven't thought about contributed to the wage gap, like when workers go home from work and they have to change out of their clothes and take a shower before they can even greet their families, which they've never had to do before. This led to daily laundry having to be done where you separate out your clothes, higher bills to be able to pay for all the water for the extra showers and the extra laundry, and children and families being home all day, leading to higher utility bills. Many of these essential jobs have work schedules that change on a regular basis. There's no set schedule. There's no guarantee of hours, which means there's no guarantee of how much they would even bring home each week in their paychecks. And temporary essential pay or hazard pay was provided to some, with an emphasis on temporary, which helped with the extra costs and threat of the pandemic for a short time, but schools remained closed. So they still had to find a way to pay for this increased childcare if they did have to go to the workplace, which many of our members did. And because the schools were closed, they had to find ways to pay for this childcare, even though the hazard was still there. The hazard pay or the essential pay was taken from them. All of these factors have contributed to the growing wage gap. And the last point I want to talk about is mental labor. And I didn't coin this phrase, but it really resonates with me, and I'm sure many women across the country. It's the unwritten, unrecognized extra burdens that culturally and structurally usually fall on women. Many of our members, women members, suffered tremendous stress in the grocery and healthcare fields in Seattle as we were at ground zero in dealing with the onset of the virus. They were like guinea pigs of how to deal with infected patients, lack of PPE, fear of bringing it home to your family just because you worked in a grocery store, as well as dealing with the school shutting down, all happening within a week's time, crunching together all these intense, stressful feelings. Grocery workers dealt with severely and difficult and stressful working conditions in response to a hoarding public, emptying the shelves of food and supplies, changes to their schedules with no notice that they weren't prepared for, mandatory overtime, stress of making sure their kids were safe and supervised at home. Food packing workers dealt with the fear of working with thousands of their coworkers inside a windowless facility, hoping that their company was doing everything possible to protect them. Confronting and dealing with the difficult public, breaking up customer fights over sanitizer and toilet paper, customer frustration over the long lines and being forced to wear masks, rude and hostile customers spitting, coughing, lashing out at innocent frontline workers. Women also had the stress of acting as an educator, a teacher, an IT specialist, a school psychologist before and after work, exhausting and confusing to teach math that you haven't thought about in 20 years. I can personally attest to, I could not help my child with her 4th grade fractions to save my life. We had to fix computer issues, help children navigate their life without friends or a social network. All of this falls on women. Most of it falls on women. Navigating the changing phases in their school district and with the work district, schools opening and closing again, hybrid school schedules competing with parental work schedules, employers opening, then closing, then opening, then closing as they move from phase to phase, causing uncertainty. No break for women between this work, the children, the online school, the feeding, the cooking, the chores. These are the unwritten defaults, and many times it falls on women. Thank you for allowing me to share some of the stories that we've experienced here out in Seattle and across the country.
Thank you, Kate. You two packed in so much and such a help to be reminded of so many of the issues that face essential workers and, you know, some folks working in packed environments where their protection is in question. So really helpful. So glad you're part of this event. I know Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon would like to introduce Carla, but I'm not sure that she's still on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Our next speaker is Carla Gallo, Chief Business Officer at GK Pharmaceuticals. GK Pharmaceuticals is a contract development and manufacturing organization, CMO, committed to research, development, and innovation of safe and effective diagnostic methods and medical treatments. It is the first biopharmaceutical company in Puerto Rico owned by women of color. We're so pleased to have you, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. And thank you again for the organization for allowing me to be part of this conference and also give a little speech about what we're going through right now in Puerto Rico. As I was introduced, I am Carla Gallo, the Chief Business Officer of GK Pharmaceuticals CMO located in Puerto Rico. We are 45 minutes from the metro area, which is San Juan. We are a CMO company, which is also known as a contract manufacturing operations. We're open for business from medical devices, solid dosage, capsules, injectables. And right now, due to this pandemic, we have gone through a lot, even from the beginning. Me and my partners, we were all from Puerto Rico. We were actually all born in Puerto Rico as well. But due to circumstances about 20 to 28 years ago, we all moved to the States. But we decided about 3 years ago to take this project and take it back to the island. And you know what? Let's do the sacrifice. We want to bring growth to the island. The business as well as the contract manufacturing, as Jennifer Gonzalez said, the island has so much opportunity that we saw this opportunity as well. But I would say before the coronavirus pandemic, it's always has been a pandemic for women in the workforce in this industry as well as a CMO, as the pharma and biopharma industry. It has always been led by men, always men being, like say, head of these companies, as well as we know, like all these big companies, Pfizer, Merck. So it was a good sacrifice, and it was also, I was gonna say, hardship since the beginning to bring this company to Puerto Rico. So for us, it's always been, before this pandemic, we've had a pandemic within the industry to open up this company. But luckily with support of our families, of people in Puerto Rico, government officials who have, seen us push through the industry and showing that not only men can lead this industry, but also women can be part of this industry and make an impact as well. But on being specific, as we all know, coronavirus hit us hard last year, and it was suddenly February, March, everything shut down. The government was like, hey, there's gonna be a total lockdown. Being a CMO, which in Puerto Rico is part of essential workers, we still had to work through and push through the pandemic. So it was very, very tough because everybody, even our employees, are we still going to work? Are we going in person working? And it all changed. So we had to gear up with PPE items, social distancing, make sure everybody was 6 feet apart. There was a time where we're like, hey, we don't know. Before there was vaccines, there was treatments. We had to, everybody had to work from home for a little while. And even us, as some of us are mothers at the company, we, as mentioned by the other attendees, we had to be a mom plus work, plus take care of school, plus feed children, all within the 8 hours from 9 to 5 work schedule. So it was very, very hard. But I was going to say, through this pandemic as well, there's also has been changes that we can't do the normal things as someone can do when there isn't a pandemic. Also, regards to business wise, it affected us from, we had many prospective clients from overseas, especially India, who were about to sign a proposal, but February, March hit and they were on lockdown as well. So it affected us also, not, social within the company, but, overseas economically as well. We have been struggling over because of that as well. Another impact that this whole coronavirus has given us as well. We also see the whole negative impact that it has been within the company, but we saw that, we can't do this type of business right now. We won't have this client overseas coming in our company and bring the economy that we need in order to pay our employees, our utilities and other needs that we needed at the company. So we took this, and our research and development team turned it around. It was like, hey, there's a high demand of testings right now. And as we saw at the time, there is a lot of companies, a lot of states, the government officials couldn't find the testing to test, their employees, the people, to know who had this test or not. So our research and development team was like, let's create our own COVID test, COVID kit, PCR test. So, within doing a lot of research and development within those past months, we put our own test together, and we submitted our EUA to the FDA. So that also changed because, it's like when you have a mindset of going into the business, it's not like what we thought it was going to be from the get-go. We thought we're gonna we're gonna have this client from India, we're gonna do their injectables, but something is, coronavirus hit us and everything changed. So as Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez said, right now we're using this pandemic as a plus to look at something positive, as helping those who need the testings, need our PCR kits. So we're actually, as we got approved by the FDA September 19th of 2020, now we're working on our manufacturing of those tests. But I would tell a woman out there, like, it's not easy, and especially in an industry where it's led by men, and it's hard because we get knocked down. Especially as personally for myself, I'm young. I'm the youngest one out of the group. So everyone thinks, oh, you're not much knowledgeable, you don't have that much experience, but you create the experience as you go. And I believe one of the attendees mentioned as well, we're mothers, we're the ones who have to provide to the children. Yes, the dad can be there, but majority of the time, women are known to be the ones to provide to the household. So, I like how in the 20th century things have changed, and women have the power, to make decisions in the house and as well as in the business as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. It was really interesting to hear how a woman-owned company, so all the challenges for all of you running the company, but then needing to pivot and finding an opportunity to do really important work related to the pandemic. Very inspiring, and I'm sure was incredibly difficult. So thank you. We appreciate your perspective in this conversation. Congresswoman Dean, are you going to introduce Kim?
I was able to stay, so thank you. Yes, it's a privilege to be able to introduce and bring to this conversation Kim Ramsey. Welcome, Kim. Kim is from my district. She is the CEO and founder of Rick and Kim LLC, founder and owner of the Willow School, and founder of the Norristown Chamber of Commerce. She's a serial founder. As I mentioned earlier, Kim has been a leader in childcare, and throughout the duration of the pandemic has focused on highlighting the positives of how businesses are creatively working around the many challenges they've faced. So thank you, Kim, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Congresswoman Dean. I always appreciate your accolades. I do this, as you said, because it's important work. I also thank the WCPI for having me today and the other panelists that have been on this group. It's been amazing to, again, be amongst people who understand what's going on and to shed more light on what has happened and what we need to do, because it's not over after this pandemic has passed. So as was said, I'm Kim Ramsey, the owner of Rick and Kim LLC. I've had this company for 21 years and mainly focusing in childcare. I established the Willow School in an under-resourced community 9 years ago, but I also was a owner of a childcare center called the Goddard School, a private-owned franchise in over-resourced community. So I understand the challenges of both kinds of communities. I also founded the Norristown Chamber of Commerce when I got to Norristown because I needed a community of leaders, business owners, community activists, government leaders to collaborate and partner on how we can make our community and workforce a better place for our residents and owners. I'm also, as you all said, I have a degree in economics and an MBA in HR management. So I've worked in the civil, private sector and also as a military intelligence officer. So I have faced all the kind of challenges a woman would have in the military, private sector, and as an entrepreneur. So I bring an experience, and why I say that is because I bring a perspective and experience of over 35 years. I am also a mother of 3 now adult daughters, 27, 24, and 21. Her last year in college. She'll be graduating next year. So I understand all that everyone has said. I felt the statistics that was brought by Emily. So I understand, and that is actually why I started to build a business in childcare. My own self, I couldn't find quality care consistently and in areas where I was employed, and it was very challenging. So that's how I got kind of into this area of childcare. I also want to, from my perspective, is kind of give you what's going on as a woman, as an entrepreneur, a woman who employs women, and a woman who makes it possible for women to work. Before the pandemic, childcare has been reported by you all was already in jeopardy. It was for, as Congresswoman Dean said, it had not had a revitalization or emphasis since World War II. So many of us in childcare were opening up these centers on our own money. We didn't get enough funding to have it stabilized, and we were constantly dependent on subsidies and or private pay parents that also faced the challenges of the rising cost. So there was no margins, low wages. The quality of our teachers are also degree teachers. Society didn't really consider childcare a business, and it is a business with educated people who have degrees, whether it's a master's degree, a CDA, associate's degree. These are degreed women, but we were not treated as a business. And I'm so excited for the first time since I've been in this industry that there's been more emphasis on really highlighting the necessity and the vitality and the importance of childcare. All the speakers today have actually given all that I was going to say, and I'm just living it out in my childcare center and as an entrepreneur. If 99% of my workforce is women, 90% of them have degrees, and 60% of them are mothers. They too felt what everyone else was having. Therefore, why people could not find childcare centers was, one, because we had women who could not come to work. They had to stay home and take care of their children. They also were afraid of their health and safety, and some of them, and the lower wages that we're providing them. Some of them were actually able to find work in other industries besides childcare. So because my workforce, when we did return in June, was cut in half by 50%, I was basically 99% full capacity. But after the pandemic, I was only able to bring back 50% of my staff, along with the COVID requirements of 6 feet spacing and all the other safety regulations that we needed to make sure that the children and our staff maintained safety. We could only accept 40% of the capacity. We had to find places to put our furniture because we couldn't keep it in the rooms in order to have the 6 feet spacing. So the challenges physically on the facility to accommodate more children was drastic. We also were unable to have enough funding. We lost funding for all the extra cleaning supplies. Our parents could not return to work, so we couldn't get them back into our care because they could no longer afford the tuition. Subsidy at that time had not kicked in, so we're using our own monies to keep it afloat. We also had the impact of everyone saying the elementary schools closing. So for the first time, my school is really for children from 6 months to 6 years old. And in the summer, we go to 12. But now we found ourselves having to deal with children up to actually high school because parents were afraid of their children being left alone unsupervised. So our parents being essential workers, as people said, their employers did not let them adjust their schedules to meet some of the changes we had to do. We had to open later than usual. So our hours shifted from 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. We had to go from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. And that required other employers to accommodate their employees to leave early to pick up. That didn't happen. So unfortunately, our essential families who were considered essential jobs, they did not even accommodate them to come pick up their children early, and or if they got sick with COVID and or their child or had to take care of someone else, they also lost their jobs that they could not return quickly. Yes, the plans and the programs have increased now and have allowed us to employers to accommodate that. But for essential workers who are in grocery stores, nursing aides, that still has not trickled down enough or fast enough to support women to stay employed. And you all have showed the statistics of why women are further behind in the workplace or unable to participate. So therefore, it goes to an entrepreneur to like me. If I don't have customers, which are people working in the workplace, they can no longer work. Therefore, they can no longer afford childcare. I am at a 40% reduction in 40% enrolled, and I am on the brink of every other childcare center of losing my center. Most, if not many of my colleagues have decided to leave this industry. We were already in a shortage of childcare centers and teachers and staff. This pandemic has exacerbated that enormously. I have a waiting list of demand now as people are getting vaccinated and it's opening up and there are more plans in place to help us financially, but I cannot find teachers. And it's a quality childcare center, star 4. So you need to make sure you have quality teachers in a childcare center that can perform the lesson plans and care for them emotionally. We're also dealing with their disabilities or learning disabilities. And we have a range of educational needs now. We're not only just preschool, we're also middle school. And as Kate said, 4th grade math is challenging. So my one teacher has to facilitate all of that. So it is challenging for us, and I make a decision day to day, month to month, if I can remain open. But because I hear stories like this, I am involved in the community. I have made a commitment to my community, an under-resourced community, to remain open as much as possible. So I have gotten creative. I have been an advocate of different thinking within the chamber too. In my chamber, we collaborate. And so I collaborated with the theater because the theaters were closed. We used that facility to house our virtual learning for our school-age children. I was able to get college students who were no longer in college. They were physically here because of doing work virtually. They actually come in part-time to help with virtual learning. And these kids love it. They see their kind of peers working with them. They give them hope and encouragement. It also helps the students that are online in college to actually help someone else and get their mind off of their own troubles. We've also partnered with food banks and Wegmans, as Kate said too. Our families depend on food. So this was the first place that they could go to, and we remained open to provide food 3 meals a day. We also fresh fruit and vegetables because we are in a food desert where I am located. And we also, for the chamber, provided PPE kits. We've opened it, or I've encouraged our Montgomery County, the larger county, to not only give it to businesses, but to also our families who needed it. So it's a kit that has masks and temperature checks and shields and all those things, hands, wipes, sanitizers. It was especially important when there was a shortage. So we are trying to pivot. We are trying to help our community. It is a need. But I'm glad we're here today for people in the economy, for our legislators, for our business sector to understand that childcare is a business. It is vital to the economy, it's vital to our recovery, and it is critical that we remain focused on childcare, providing more funding and legislation to allow our women and our other employees to return to work. I'm glad finally that we're finding short-term solutions, but I am hopeful that we continue to make this a joint effort amongst us all that are here today, legislators and business sectors, to make childcare an important and a priority moving forward. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kim. That was quite a presentation and raised so many issues that I think we all definitely. I think we have all thought of some of these things from time to time, but putting it all together, it's pretty overwhelming. And you certainly made the most of your situation based on the partnerships and so on. We are already over time, but I promised each of our speakers, no matter what happened, because I knew this was probably going to happen, we would go around to each of you one last time to give us your key takeaway for policymakers before we close the event. And I'm going to start with Emily.
This is not a status quo moment. We can do so many things differently. We saw that Congress and elected officials responded in such an amazingly thoughtful and unique way when COVID hit. Let's keep that same thinking. Let's use paid leave, flexibility, and the ingenuity of our employers to help our employees and get our women back in the workplace, support our women entrepreneurs, and really create great cultures in workplaces for all.
Thank you. Kate?
Thank you. I think this is an opportunity to really address safety in the workplace, whether it's COVID or otherwise, recognizing that just because it's low wage work doesn't mean that it's not essential and that they shouldn't make excellent wages that they can afford to send their children to daycare and schools, strengthening our organizing and collective bargaining rights, scheduling rights legislation, paid time off for family emergencies, Paycheck Fairness Act, continuing down the path of the American Rescue Plan, and of course, child care tax credits. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for listening. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Carla?
Yes, I would say even before the pandemic, as women in the industry, the different groups, organizations, businesses, we've already taken care of a lot and gone through enough, and show that yes, we put our foot down as well. And I think even with this pandemic and post-pandemic, women will lead each industry as we have done so far, even at home and at the workplace. And I think it's important to show what women have gone through and have will pass through this pandemic as well.
Thank you. And Kim?
Thank you. And I'm just going to kind of sum it up and say, therefore, childcare is not only a women's issue. It's a government and private sector issue that requires that we do more for it and that we demand for it. And for just because everyone's given the kind of ending for children and workforce, I'm going to say as an entrepreneur, it requires that legislators look at the business of childcare and provide more flexible lending rules and regulations so that we are able to access more capital to remain open and to remain stable and to also provide a living, working wages for ourselves. So thank you. It's important work and we're all doing, and I'm looking forward to the future. Particularly, I'm excited about the American Rescue Plan that I will be working with the Goldman Sachs 10 small businesses on and providing my insight on what I think we can do and really impact with those dollars. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Madeline and Jennifer, a quick 1-minute sign off here from each of you too, if you'd like.
I don't think I can do any better than the women who have spoken. I'll tell you what I think, which is when people say to me, I can't wait to get back to normal, I reject that. I can't wait to not get back to normal. I want us to get back to better. And so through the ideas, the experiences, the expertise of the women on this call and the other conversations we have had, I hope we get back to something far, far better. Biden administration is calling it Build Back Better. That's what we must do, and we must change and lift the experience for women and children. Thanks.
Jennifer.
Thank you, Cindy. I agree with Madeline. I think this whole experience of the pandemic for more than a year now has changed everything we know and everything we worked for before. So I think even all the priorities for policymakers have changed. And this kind of briefing, just pointing out the recent obstacles that many women just face because of the pandemic, it's important to know how we can handle all those data, like the care centers, the caregivers, even the connection for kids and students, for all those mothers that are working now, and how the government is going to fund all of these things. So I think it's not just the centers, it's about infrastructure as well. What infrastructure we're going to need, and now more rural areas are without broadband, and in a world now that everything is connected, Zoom, webinars, etc., kids connecting to get their schools online. Not everybody in rural America got that. I know that by a fact in my own district. So even when some communities are talking about 5G, and there's some that don't even get the 3G. So I think it should be a complete package, not just one bill or funding for a period of time about having that incentive for care centers. It's how we're going to sustain and how long this is going to take. So those are things that we need to look for in terms of not just from now to 6 months, a year. What's going to happen from a year from now? Are we prepared for that? Are we making plans for that, or are we thinking that this is going to be the end, and there's not going to be any more viruses coming from this pandemic? So I think just the issues by area that you pointed out are going to help us a lot to think what should be the scope. And again, thank you, Cindy, for coordinating, and from all panelists for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Really, to each of our speakers and to the Congresswomen, we really appreciate your sharing of your expertise and experiences, giving us so much to consider. It's huge. So many challenges, but so many opportunities, as each of you has said. And we have appreciated your insights into how the pandemic affected women, which we hope will create further momentum to establish better workplaces in a post-pandemic world. So thank you all. This conversation was recorded and should be available for viewing on our website at wcpinst.org by tomorrow morning, if not sooner. In a few minutes, you will receive an email asking you to fill out a survey about today's discussion. We hope that each of you will take a few minutes to respond. Thank you again to the Bipartisan Women's Caucus leadership, both members and staff, the Society for Human Resource Management and United Food and Commercial Workers International Union for their support for this briefing. And finally, my thanks to Cynthia Ramos, Cheryl Williams, and Julia O'Connor for their work to make this briefing possible. Thank you for joining us.